Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Tapia Bepe and I am going to be the moderator for this webinar. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping rules for everyone that's going to be joining in. So I think as you are not talking, kindly mute your mic so that we avoid any background noise. And for any questions that you might have during the presentation, you can just kindly take note. We're going to have a question and answer, or you can just type them in the chat box, and then we'll be able to tackle the questions as we are going. So before we begin, this webinar is in partnership with ZNCC. So I'll allow at this juncture, allow me to introduce Lois, who is going to give the welcome remarks from ZNCC. Thank you, and over to you, Lois.
Okay, thank you, Tapiwa. Sorry, I am not able to put my video. My name is Lois Ndangwa. I'm the administrator for the training school at Zimbabwe National Chamber of Commerce. First of all, it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all to the training workshop on unpacking of the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. ZNCC has partners Victoria Falls Stock Exchange to unpack what the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange is all about. Basically, the training will empower private sector players on an appreciation of what the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange entails us for their businesses. Let me also take this opportunity to thank our partner, Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, for this noble partnership and hope this friendship will keep growing for the benefit of our nation. Thank you for coming. Over to you, Tapiwa.
Thank you very much, Lois. This juncture, allow me to introduce our speaker for today, who is going to take us through the presentation. His name is Robert Mubaiwa, and he is the head of VFX Markets. And in his role, he is responsible for the primary and secondary markets for VFX, which mainly comprise new and existing listings, product development, market data, trading, and operations. Robert, thank you for agreeing to be the presenter on this webinar. I will now hand over the virtual podium to you to take us through your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tapiwa. Thank you, Lois. I will briefly put my video, but I think going forward, I will be able to switch it off to make the presentation at least flowing. So just like what Tapiwa said, I'm really responsible for VFX Markets, and it is a new assignment that we've been given. And we want to work with everyone to be able to make sure that we play our part in terms of economic development. Therefore, but as a background in terms of our trust, why we formed VFX, if you realize what has been happening on the ZSC, you realize that we have been having challenges which related to, firstly, the depth of listings. We were having so few listings. Perhaps to put it simply, we were having more delistings than we have listings. So it is against that background where we realized that what is our role, and are we still playing, are we still relevant to the market in terms of being a platform for capital raise? Obviously, if you're operating in this market, the challenges that you have seen in terms of the current issues, and for issuers to come on board and raise money, I think we all experience the challenges which are in terms of the forex shortages. Therefore, the current instability has also made us to think to say, how do we provide a service given that we are a capital raising platform? And if you look at the financial results in terms of the financial performance, most of the audit opinions have been qualified. Most of the financial statements have been qualified, and it is a cause for concern because these are some macroeconomic challenges which we have in the market. Then obviously the last part, you look at the inability of foreigners to repatriate sell proceeds on the ZSC. Therefore, that's the background within which we then said we needed to go a step further to at least provide relevance and make sure our key customers, investors, issuers, everyone else is happy in that process. So that's why we thought Victoria Falls Stock Exchange would be ideal. So allow me to start my presentation. Tapiwa, if you can allow me to share my screen.
You can try now, Robert.
Okay. So in terms of the presentation, I'm just going to touch on what is VFX. Confirm we are seeing the presentation.
Yes, it's visible. You can just put it on presentation mode.
Is it now showing? It is now presentation mode.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay. So I'll just take you what it is all about, why it is important to issuers and investors, and what we have done so far. And perhaps for those who want to take part in terms of the listing process, we just highlight some major key attributes of the listing requirements, then perhaps the listing steps and how someone can participate and invest on VFX. So VFX is just any exchange which is a securities exchange, and it can do equities, it can do debt, it can do REITs, it can do ETFs, and commodities. More of late, obviously, we've been working on the commodity side. But it is important to note that we have been established to exclusively trade in USD and any other hard currency. As part of the government's efforts, which is obviously to kickstart the offshore financial center, we are at the forefront in terms of spearheading that process. Therefore, if you look at the things that we get so far, we are getting serious support from the government in terms of making sure that VFX is really successful. And in terms of ownership, currently it's 100% owned by the ZSC, and government has 32%. The balance, which is 65%, is in the hands of private investors, which include members of the exchange and any other private investors. And in terms of the legislation that is available, you realize we still be governed by the Securities and Exchange Act and their subsidiary legislation, in particular the SI 100, which specifies the minimum requirements for exchanges for participants in the market. And we do have a specific SI, which was gazetted in 2020, which is SI 196. And we do have special exchange control provisions, again, which is RIV 177, which were issued in 2020 to align with the vision to make sure that VFX is successful, and the exchange control provisions that apply on other exchanges don't apply on VFX. Then if you look at the Finance Act, in particular, the recent Finance Act number 7, it talks specifically about the Offshore Financial Service Center and how we are going to play a part in being part of that Offshore Financial Service Center. So the provisions that have been put on the current Finance Act is giving rise to a bigger animal, which is the International Offshore Financial Service Center. But in there, we have the Victoria Falls playing a critical part. You also realize that there's been an SI which has been promulgated, which led to Victoria Falls being declared a special economic zone, and this was done in 2021. So in a nutshell, this is the legislation that we currently use that enables us to do what we are currently doing. Just for important purposes, I think you have also realized that the president has been here to officially launch the VFX, and this is the trust in terms of the support that is there at government level to ensure that we play a part in terms of the economic revival. We play our part as a capital raising platform. So we do have tremendous amount of support when it comes to issues to spearhead the development of this exchange. And in terms of the proposed legislation on the offshore financial services center, and this is actually going to be very key. Our understanding is that government is working on the legislation, and part of the legislation, there's various restrictions currently which you find, especially on debt transactions. The amount that one can borrow without really seeking exchange control approval. So, and the loan restrictions which are there. So these have been clearly, there are not going to be any restrictions when it comes to transactions in the offshore financial services center. For listed companies, you realize that there are limits which pertains to individual foreign shareholder, the limits which pertains to aggregate shareholders. So all those limits have been taken away. The issues of fungibility, there are no restrictions whatsoever for listed companies that want to participate on VFX, whether they can have primary or secondary listing on VFEX. Then in terms of operating and restrictions on the financial, on the offshore accounts, again, our understanding is that there's not going to be any restrictions. There are not going to be restrictions in terms of investments on immovable property in VFOS. So why has VFX been attractive to issuers? I think, like I indicated in terms of the background, that as an institution, we realize the need for companies to be able to come and then be able to raise currency. But in this case, they are not only raising currency, they are raising hard currency, either for expansion purposes or for increased capacity utilization. And we are all aware what has been happening on the auction floors and on the RPZ auction system. So we believe when someone comes to raise the money on VFEX, they will be able to plan in terms of how they want to do their business. Once you are in a position to do that, it means you can do so much for the country. So the next important part is obviously the clearing and settlement. We are currently in the first phase of doing the clearing and settlement, and we are doing through the local platform. But we have been allowed by the legislation to be able to do offshore clearing, and this, in our view, it provides comfort. Once we get to that second level, it gives us comfort to be in a position to at least remain confident that foreign investors who would have deserted this market as a result of the challenges in terms of repatriation. Once we do the offshore clearing and settlement, then those fears are obviously extinguished as a result of us being able to do that. But I also need to emphasize that in terms of the trades that have been happening locally, we've never experienced a challenge in terms of the delays as a result of failure or the money has not been, the money for investors has not been remitted when a sale takes place. So we have had this 100% success rate in terms of trades that have been executed on the market, and settlement is taken place seamlessly. What is also important is obviously that the issuers, obviously there is a reduction in the currency risk for listed companies, and they'll be able to plan their business on the basis that there is no fluctuation in terms of what is happening elsewhere. And for issuers, obviously, the listing requirements are less onerous as compared to ones on the ZSA. So we believe there is value for everyone, either issuers, to come and list. I'll talk about the incentives later on, but on the basis of this, if people really want to plan now in terms of how they want to run their business, they have an option to consider VFX as a platform where they can raise that money. So in terms of incentives, you realize that there is a specific circular that has been issued by a Reserve Bank, which speaks to retaining funds as a result of additional capacity that has been created when one lists on the ZSC. So as issuers, you are able to retain at least 100% of the increased export earnings. And I will show a slide later on where we try to illustrate the benefits of that increased export retention, 100% export retention. And for newly established entities, our understanding is there is tax holiday if you have been operating within 5 years of operation. There's some tax holiday that you're supposed to pay. The other duty-free imports for raw materials for export manufacturing, and a lower tax rate for manufacturing firms which export at least 51% of their total revenue. The export and drawback schemes have been also put in to facilitate or to make it more attractive for people really to come. But these apply to the wider market. But specifically to VFEX, the 100% retention makes a huge difference in terms of how the company, which is listed Attracted Finance, can come and then retain 100% of their earnings. And for investors, obviously we have talked about the trading and clearing, which is on and offshore. There is no capital gains tax on disposal of securities, and this is a big deal. I think if you will notice what has happened on VFX at the moment, that capital gains is actually been increased from 1% to 1.5%, and if you are selling within 6 months, then it's 2%. Therefore, there is every advantage for investors to participate on VX based on some of this 1 to 2%, 1.5% to 2% is really significant when you look at what you would have obtained when you break even on the ZSE. And for foreign investors, again, the dividend withholding tax has been lowered from 10% to 5%. And if you look at the transaction costs, they've really been reduced to almost half what is obtainable on the ZSE. It's 2.124% compared to what you obtain on the ZSE. And there's obviously the reduced currency risk for listed firms and for investors. For your pension fund, this is the market to be. And in terms of the exchange control provisions, as long as you open an FCA account, which is denominated for the purposes of investment, all the cash inflows, if you're a listed firm, all the cash that you would have raised from that market, you can use it as and when you want it. There are no indefinite periods. There are no surrender requirements. So effectively, that means you are able, as an institution, to plan how we are going to work, how we are going to use your funds. These funds are not going to be touched. And for investors, the settlement process and dividends, you can use them for, again, you can keep them in your account for indefinite period, and you can pay literally everything that you want, and they're freely remittable. So this, for us, it's an important part in terms of how investors usually, these investments, our understanding is currently the markets are treated differently. When you transfer funds, there's the liquidation, which really don't apply when it is an investment on the VFX. And for resident companies, investors in companies, you only need to apply once to get your exchange control approval to have an offshore bank account. But once you do that, after that, there are no exchange control provisions which apply. Therefore, we have looked at it and realized that this is a benefit is given the environment that we are in. It's really tough. So what this page just tried to illustrate the 100% increased export, and we are saying someone has increased their export earnings by 20 million. And we've just tried to look at the current RBZ retention ratio, which is 40%, and this ratio changes from time to time. And we have looked at an official rate. I think this was at 27 January, where the exchange rate was, official exchange rate was 108.67, and the parallel market rate was about 220. So how this then affects an issuer in terms of how they plan their work. you realize that issuers will be able to retain about 20 million, and the 8 million is going to be sold through the auction. So if you then do the maths in terms of the difference between your what you would call the parallel market rate and the official rate, that premium is huge. It's more than almost 100%. If it is 100% based on this, what is it? How is it this loss going to be reflected on issuer's books? So you are literally say losing about 3.95 million as a result of that money which is auctioned through the market, instead of simply retaining the 20 million and you simply pay your listing fee, which is 0.05% of your market cap, and that's all. If you are bringing it for the first time, perhaps with your advisor's fees and stuff, perhaps that cost is a once-off cost, but this benefit you're going to carry it for an indefinite period as long as you're listed on the ZSE. So we believe the cost-benefit analysis for one to be able to come on the market, it's a no-brainer in our view, given the numbers that we are seeing, especially on the export incentives. So in terms of the statistics, you realize that what we started obviously with one counter. We've almost 1 year, 3 or 4 months in operation. We started with one counter, which was the SIPO migration. We added just a few more, and by end of the year, we had a total of 4. And as you can see, the market cap is literally grown by 335%. What's more pertinent about these statistics is the latest issuer who came on board, that's Caledonia, managed to raise more than what they initially wanted. They wanted to come to the market to raise about 3 million. And because it was oversubscribed, they ended up raising almost 8 million, 7.8, call it 8 million. And this money has been raised locally from just local investors. So the more we bring quality assets on the market, we believe there's sufficient appetite for good assets in this market. And we are proud to say all the trades that they've literally traded on the VFX have managed to settle successfully. And the official launch just to keep it in terms of the government support. So this is the current statistics in terms of what is there. The volumes, those are just numbers, but they change from time to time. So it is important. Obviously, we are at a stage in terms of the liquidity where we, as a new exchange, will be struggling with liquidity. But the more we bring in more assets, it means investors will be able to switch in and switch out. What we've seen so far in California, for example, we have realized that institutional investors have been the ones who have been approached in terms of the roadshow as they participated and they managed to get hold of this. So if you go out of Caledonia, which is a better dividend yield, which other asset are you going to go for? And it's a USD denominated asset. Therefore, there's been less selling, which has been taking place because investors really want to hold on to these assets. So the liquidity that we want, we still gonna talk to sponsors, guys who are bringing this to ensure that at least when they get, say, a comfortable ratio, they should be able to reserve a decent parcel for the retail and for other institutions which are not necessarily institutional investors, because this promotes the liquidity. But it's like I said, this is the initial stage where if you are a new exchange, you have these challenges in terms of liquidity. We have been working especially with the different partners to establish a commodities exchange. And one of the things that we have done is we've managed to sign an MOU with Dubai Gold and Commodities Exchange, specifically to target commodities in this market and to bring transparency in terms of how these products are traded. And we subsequently, they came into this market sometime in October last year, and we managed to have a key stakeholders meeting where we invited key people, Reserve Bank, MMCZ, government officials, to say, how do we establish this market? I think the skills to establish this market, because it's a new market, they could be there, but it's a new market, and we don't believe there's sufficient skills. They do, the DG6 presents, they do have the technical know-how in terms of establishing this market. So they help us to have a step-by-step approach in terms of how we are supposed to launch this, given what we need to do. So they literally advised us the process to say, what do you need to look at, what do you need to look at, and that's the process that we are currently having. We are actually having, as we speak, a workshop with MMCZ to try to thrash out some of the issues which came out in that technical meeting which we have held. We have also managed to sign an MOU with MMCZ because they are, in terms of the Mines Act, they are the sole custodian in terms of how semi-precious metals and other metals are sold in this country. Therefore, they play an important part in terms of how we are going to structure and move the commodities exchange to the next level. We are also engaging with RBZ and Fidelity. They are working on establishing, on getting their accreditation back with Dubai Gold and Commodities Exchange, and we will be, once they are accredited, it means we can then try to institute other processes that are pertinent in terms of trading gold on VFEX. So in terms of just an overview of the key, obviously there are other listings requirements which that the company has to be registered, it has to have a memo and that was of association and the free float. But I think what is more on VFX, what is more important is that issuers no longer put information in the newspaper, or like we would ordinarily see on the ZSE. You would find this information on the website. There's been a change in terms of the sponsorship. Traditionally, you would find that the role for sponsors is only been limited to members of the exchange. But we have broadened it up to include other people who have the skills, who understand the rules, to be able to write a sponsorship exam and then be sponsors on VFEX. So in terms of the minimum amount that's likely to be raised, you're looking at to raise, when you come to the market, you need to raise at least 3 million USD, and the minimum number of shareholders. Again, if you look at what's obtainable on the ZSE, they have a minimum of shareholders of 300, and in this market, it's only 50. And the listing fee, obviously, is just the percentage, 0.05% with a cap of 15,000. But more importantly, we have been allowed by the Commission to use these rules and to, if there are any comments, to then tweak the comments in line with the comments which are coming from the market. And after which then these rules then become gazetted. So this is the stage where we are. In a nutshell, this is the free float remains 30%. We still want to encourage trading, and we are saying we want at least 30% to be held by the public. So in terms of the scenarios that how one can list on VFX, if you are issuers already listed on the ZSE and you're a local firm, you can list up to 20% of your total capital, but you have to issue it only as new securities. You have to have new, we are trying to run away from this issue of the implied rate. Therefore, when you come to the VFX, you can list up to 20%, but it has to be only new securities. Or either you can delist completely from ZSE, and then list 100% on VFX. I think we've seen Pindora doing it. Pindora literally delisted from ZSE and relisted on VFX. Then if you're a foreign firm, you can list any percentage. You can also delist from ZSE and then list 100%. But when you list on VFX, you have a requirement to reinvest 20% of those proceeds within 5 years. So the other scenario, if you're not listed, local or foreign, you can literally list any percentage up to 100%, and it can be an IPO, introduction, private placement, whichever method that you think is important for you to come onto the market. And if you're a foreign firm, there's no need to reinvest the 20% capital. So in terms of the listing process, obviously the discussion with VFX is key. The appointment of key advisors, your issuers, your sponsors, your lawyers, and people who really matter in terms of bringing your securities to the market. Then you prepare your, whether it's a secular or it's a prospectus, you can do those things. Then you apply and you pay your fee, and there's those fees that are reviewed by VFX, and you can be given a conditional approval. Conditional, as the conditions being met, then you can then list on the market. So if you are trying to participate as an investor, obviously the important step is to put together your KYC information. This includes your proof of residence. Who are you? Your firm, your trust. Who are you in terms of? So you then satisfy the banks and the brokers in terms of providing information that they are able to identify and say where is the sources of money. After that, you go to open an FCA account, and you can open FCA account with any bank. When you do that, you have to open a securities custodial account with our VFX electronic depository system. Once you do that, you open a trading account with your broker, and you deposit the money in that account, and there you go, you start trading. So in terms of who you need to contact for trading purposes, you can, for custodians, there are only 5 registered custodians. That's KEPS, CPZ, FBC, Standard Chartered, and Stanbic. And once you do that, the trading accounts can be opened through any of the registered brokers. So it is important for you to understand the process in terms of who you get in touch with. We have put together the details for all the 5 custodians here, and the details for the brokers. You can easily obtain them on our website. And once you did this, you contact these people, they'll be able to open your FCA, your custodian account, and you can then trade. It is also important to note that in this instance, we are using a custodian model for simple reason that we are clearing purely USD, and ordinarily you would find on the ZSE there's the broker administered accounts, which is cheaper to manage on the basis that the broker literally can open an account without any charge. But for this reason, if you look at this model, we having a problem. The local banks are having a problem with what we call USD correspondent bank relationships. A few of our banks do have those relationships. Therefore, the ones that have these relationships, they want to cut them jealously to ensure that they comply with the specific rules and regulations that apply, that they are given by the correspondent banks when it comes to account opening. So the document that is just your national ID, your passport, your pictures, proof of race, source of income. For companies, the certificate of incorporation, CRA 14, resolutions that allow you to open these accounts, picture sizes of those who are authorized. If If you are trust, your IDs, your passports, your proof of raise, trust deed. So investment clubs in church, so your constitution, resolutions. So these are your normal KYC documents. So that really brings us to the end of this presentation, and I can take questions.
Thank you very much, Robert, for that presentations. We are now in the segment of question and answer. So if you would like to pose a question to Robert, just kindly raise your hand and then I will call you out. Or if you've got a question, you can simply type it in. I am looking at the chat. The question that was there, I think I already responded to it. Okay, I can see that there's a question from Mr. Mundoka. You can kindly go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Robert. It's eye-opening, it's exciting, and pardon me, I'm not a finance person, but I'm of course interested in investment. Just wanted to find out the difference between the bank that you use to open your trading account and the custodial services. Is it possible to have the same bank? Because I do have an FCA with one bank, and can that bank still be the custodial as well as the holder of my foreign currency account for the purposes of trading at the VFX? Thanks, Robert.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mdonga. I'm not sure which bank you are using. If you're not using any of the five, because it's a voluntary process, because the custodians, you have to get a custodial license from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Therefore, if your bank has not made that application, it means they can't be a custodian for the securities that you would have purchased on the CRSA, because we are guided by licenses which are issued to the Commission for us also to accept you as a custodian on VFEX.
I'm using Standard Chartered Bank.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're using Standard Chartered Bank, yes, they do have a custodial account, a custodian. So you can literally go to them. I think the contact person is Wilson or Muchajrega. They can help you in terms of that process. I'm not sure whether.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mdoga, for that question. Just quickly checking if there are any in the chat. Okay, I see there are no any further questions. All right. Do we have any more participants that would like to pose a question to Robert during this question and answer before we actually close this segment?
I'm not sure whether the AN is the hand up or is the one for Mr. Mandonga. There's, I think, I'm not sure OW or AN. I'm not sure who is. Or people can shoot without.
Yeah. I can see that it's still Mr. Mdoga's hand, which is still up.
Okay.
But participants have the right to unmute themselves and ask. Maybe we can just give it 2 more minutes. Okay, I can see that there are no further questions. Okay, I can see, sorry, you are labeled under research, so pardon me for saying it out like that, but you can go ahead and introduce yourself and ask your question. You can go ahead. I can see your name is written as Research CSAM. You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Robert. It was quite a wonderful presentation. So I understand that we had Bindura, the listing from the ZSE and listing to the VFX. Well, I didn't actually get the procedure, how we go about it as investors who had some stake in Bindura. So maybe if you could assist us on the process of how we have to treat that. We had some stake in Bindura on the VFX, but then it's now listed on the VFX.
Okay. No, thank you. I think it is actually a very pertinent question. Remember, we were also transferring from ZSC to VFEX. The accounts that you would have was through Tingeketai. And the depository which is being used on VFX is VFX depository. Therefore, you still need to go through that process. You just need to contact your broker, and they will get, there is a number that is already been assigned on each and every one who is migrated. Therefore, the broker will simply get that number from our depository, and when they get that number, you can then open a trading account with that particular broker. And if you don't have an existing FCA, you can then open an FCA and then open your CSD account. That is the process.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that question. I see there are no further questions, Robert. So maybe what I'll do is you can maybe share your contact details in the chat so that if ever there are people who have follow-up questions, they're able to get in touch with you so that we can close the meeting. But allow me to thank our presenter for today, Robert, for taking time out of your busy schedule to come through and actually educate us or enlighten us about the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange and how we can participate as investors. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our partners at NCC for helping us to organize this webinar and to facilitate participants to actually come through. We truly value your partnership and the relationship that we have with yourselves. And lastly, I would like to thank all participants that are in this call for taking time to come through and be with us on this webinar. If you're not joined, we will not have a webinar. So thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules as well to come through and learn about the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. I will also just put our contact details in the chat. For any further engagements, we are available to assist you, or if you've got any follow-up questions or you want to be able to know some of the participants that you can use. We were talking about stockbrokers, we were talking about the custodians that you can actually make use of. All that information we do have and we'll be able to share with you. But other than that, thank you very much for your time and for coming through to this presentation. I wish you a happy day and a restful upcoming weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tapio.